Welcome to the programme. Americans are being urged to stay clear of Afghanistan's main airport because of a credible threat. President Joe Biden has already warned another attack on Kabul airport is highly likely within 36 hours. And he's vowed further strikes against ISIL following Thursday's suicide bombing, which killed at least 175 people. Gabriel Elizondo reports now from Washington, D.C.
Friday's drone strike that killed 2 ISIL-K members and wounded another was the first retaliatory strike against the group. But according to President Joe Biden, it won't be the last. It's unclear if those killed had a direct role in Thursday's airport attack that killed over 150 Afghans and over a dozen U.S. military personnel. The Pentagon won't release the names of the ISIL-K members they killed, only saying they were planning future attacks.
I am not going to talk about specific capabilities ISIS may have lost in this strike. They lost a planner, and they lost a facilitator, and they've got 1 wounded. And the fact that 2 of these individuals are no longer walking on the face of the earth, that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the people of Afghanistan. It's a good thing for our troops and our forces at that airfield. And I think I'm just going to leave it there.
While the U.S. and the Taliban are coordinating on airport security, that cooperation did not extend to the drone strike. A Taliban spokesperson told Reuters news agency they should have been informed before the airstrike took place. In a statement Saturday afternoon, Biden said the chance of another terrorist attack in the next 24 to 36 hours is very high. It's believed around 4,000 U.S. troops are still at the airport in Kabul, and commanders say despite the risks, the mission continues until the August 31st deadline Biden has put in place.
Threats to our forces and to this operation remain real and significant. I'm sure you can appreciate that. And now as the military mission begins to end in Kabul, thousands of service members are working across the globe and within the United States to complete this incredibly important mission.
Caught in the middle, innocent Afghan civilians. At an airport near Washington on Saturday, Afghan evacuees continued to arrive in America after an arduous journey.
Well, I would say last 6 or 7 days have been the toughest days of my life, honestly. I don't want to lie, or I don't want to exaggerate, but it is how it is. Things are really bad all around the airport, all the entrances. And you kind of feel lucky if you can get just through those gates.
Over the weekend, America was learning more of the U.S. service members killed in the suicide attack. Max Soviak, a Navy medic, was one of them. He was only 2 years old when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan in 2001. Friends and family back in his hometown of Ohio are grieving his death.
He was just a really good kid, that everybody liked. Everybody loves the family. Just very well respected.
The U.S. military pullout from Afghanistan was measured in months and then weeks, and now it's down to days. And it could be the most unpredictable and dangerous phase of all, with President Biden simultaneously warning Americans that there could be more attacks against U.S. troops in Kabul, while also more strikes against those the U.S. says is responsible. Gabriel Elizondo, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Meanwhile, the Taliban says Kabul airport will be under its control very soon as it bolsters security following Thursday's attack. The sound of gunfire rang out near the international airport earlier. Witnesses say the Taliban was firing to disperse people trying to get on evacuation flights. Crowds outside the airport have reportedly thinned after an increase in Taliban checkpoints nearby. The group is now escorting a limited number of Afghans inside. Rob McBride has more now from the Afghan capital.
At Kabul International Airport, a real sense that we're now getting into the end game of this very long and often chaotic and traumatic evacuation process. The surest sign of that has come with the Taliban now taking over some of the guarding duties from the US military as they reduce their perimeter in preparation for their final departure, for the final American boots to be off the ground. We have seen Taliban fighters take over guard posts on the perimeter and actually inside the airport itself. The imminent end of this evacuation, though, has not stopped. Still crowds of people around the perimeter trying to get on some of the last flights. You do get a feeling that a lot of people will have given up hope by now and are not going back to the airport, especially with warnings of possibly more attacks. For others, though, the imminent ending of this whole process has probably made it added to the desperation of trying to get on one of the last remaining flights. But there are relatively few left now as we see fewer flights arriving and taking off. Meanwhile, in the city of Kabul itself, there is a mixed picture here as the city goes back to work after what for many has been the weekend here in Afghanistan. Businesses have largely reopened. Some ministries have reopened as they did last week, but other ministries have remained closed. And crucially for many people here, again, the banks are closed. The banking sector here has been a real problem ever since the fall of the government and the takeover by the Taliban. Some financial services opened briefly just over a week ago. The cash machines opened, but with very tight limits on the amount of money people could take out. Finally, they opened a few days ago, but now they were meant to reopen Saturday, but they have remained closed. So people have not been able to get access to their funds, access to salaries. In some cases, people are complaining they haven't been paid for months. It has led to angry scenes outside many banks, protests, and it is a bad sign for the country and this new Taliban government moving forward.
Meanwhile, hundreds of Afghans have protested outside banks in Kabul while others formed long lines at cash machines. Government employees were among those marching, demanding their salaries. They say they've not been paid for several months, and cash withdrawals at ATMs have been limited to about $200 every 24 hours.
It's almost 10 days that I've been waiting here to get my salary. I am an employee of the government. We have a patient at home. We have our problems. We cannot take our salaries out. A few days ago, the banks reopened, but are closed again. Give us our salaries so that we can be able to solve our problems.
The last British military flight has left Kabul, taking the UK's remaining diplomats and troops out of Afghanistan. It marks the end of nearly 20 years of British military presence. The final flight carrying Afghan civilians left earlier on Saturday. But hundreds of people entitled to resettlement in the UK have been left behind. Darim Baba reports.
Her name is Hava, Eve in English, and she's just entered a world full of hope and uncertainty. Her Afghan parents were evacuated from Kabul to Dubai, where they caught a Turkish Airlines flight to the UK. Helped by the cabin crew, her mum Soman had to give birth on board. As Hava arrived, the British military confirmed it was ending its flights carrying civilians. France has done the same. Shakiba, an Afghan actress living in France, managed to get her mother and brother out of Afghanistan at the last minute. As in so many cases, it involved days of frantic phone calls to people on the ground at the airport.
I've rediscovered the smell of my mother, and it's something that I'd forgotten. My mother's tears reminded me of the tears she shed when I left Afghanistan. It was really moving. A lot of emotions today.
SHABEER, an Afghan journalist, filmed himself as he and 9 close relatives waited to get onto one of the final evacuation flights. He's now in Spain.
Spending a night and day in the airport and the gate was one of the worst experiences I have ever had. I never was forced to spend the night with my family in an open place like that with thousands of people. Not in the worst days of Afghanistan.
SHABEER and his family are now seeking asylum, but the British government admits up to 1,100 Afghans eligible to be resettled in the UK, mainly because they worked with British troops, are being left behind. The head of the UK Armed Forces says it's heartbreaking.
Personally, I've probably had over 100 messages from different Afghans who I know in my long association with the country, and many of those friends of mine won't make it out.
At this small organisation near London, they're scrambling to help people still trying to get out of Afghanistan. Their founder says it's clear there are many still in danger.
The British government should act immediately in order to save the life of other thousands of other people who have been working for the past 20 years supporting the NATO mission.
As these Afghan civilians arrived in Rome, a NATO representative said his team had done everything they could.
Unsatisfied because we have left a few behind, which we are not abandoning, but which we will strive our best to take back home.
As the sun sets on the military evacuations, the question now is how many more people who fear for their lives will be able to leave Afghanistan, and how? Nadeem Barber, Al Jazeera.
France and Italy have joined a number of European countries that have now completed their evacuation missions. But French President Emmanuel Macron says he's in preliminary talks with the Taliban, with the hope of facilitating further evacuation flights while allowing humanitarian operations to continue with the help of Qatar.
We are currently having discussions which are very fragile and preliminary. That is why I am being very careful in my answer. But yes, discussions have begun with the Taliban on the issues of humanitarian operations and the ability to protect and repatriate Afghans who are at risk. And yes, we are working alongside with Qatar to allow these operations to proceed.
Canadians have been rallying across the country to raise awareness about the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. In Toronto, crowds called on the government to do more for those who've been left behind in Afghanistan. The demonstrations come days after Canada announced it would end its evacuation mission.
We want to make sure that the Afghan situation is not forgotten and at the same time that there is accountability. We need the Canadian government and all three parties to ensure that enough sufficient aid is going to our Afghan people and our allies who have helped out.
We want them to take action. We want them to extend the deadline. August 31st is not acceptable. And not only that, they decided to end the evacuation 5 days earlier, which was just on Thursday. That's unacceptable. Our families are still stuck there.